Hey, this is Rick with Outdoor Emergencies at hikingemergencybeacon.com, and today I have a special guest on, and it's with Cris, the hiking guy, or I say the hiking guy. It's hikingguy.com, and that's his website, and then also known as hikingguy.com on YouTube. So Cris has been doing this about 10 years, and we just started talking about 2 to 3 months ago, and I thought, let's see if maybe we can talk about some satellite communicators and get his take on some things. So I want to introduce you to Cris right now and let him actually tell you more about how he got started. And Cris, what I'd really like to know is, one, how you got started, but what really led you into reviewing satellite communicators?
Yeah, well, thank you first, Rick, for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to do something like this, do a little collaboration. And yeah, I started doing this, like you said, about 10 years ago, originally just trail guides. So friends of mine would email me and they'd say, how do I hike to the top of this mountain? And I would just send them instructions, turn-by-turn directions. And eventually I just decided to put that on the internet, and it just sort of took off from there. As an extension from that, people would ask me what type of GPS I used, how to use it. And in terms of satellite communicators specifically, I guess I had a Spot. The Spot was the first one. I actually came from a sailing background. And on sailboats, there's devices called EPIRBs, which are basically a bigger version of a PLB. And I always knew about those. And they were always on my radar. This is before, I think, PLBs came out, and the Spot came out, and I had a Spot. That was my first one ever. And then I got a DeLorme, and then because I was reviewing these GPS units and doing how-tos, it just sort of became an extension that I did the, what then became the Garmin InReach. And I remember when I first did my Garmin InReach, I did an Explore video and I did a mini video back when they weren't cool. Like hiking wasn't as big, the outdoors wasn't as big. This is whenever those came out, probably 7 years ago, ballpark around there. But hiking wasn't as big, and they just sort of sat there. They'd get a few views, and people specific like you and I who enjoy the outdoors would look at it. But now the outdoors has just gotten so big that there's just so much more out there, and more content and more viewpoints, and it's a great thing. So that's how I got my start, and that's how I started doing the satellite communicators. I have a tech background, so it always interested me. Gadgets interest me, and navigation and all that stuff, especially coming from a sailing background. Navigation's a big deal there too. So that was always a thing. And yeah, now there's like a bunch of different units coming out. It's an exciting time for the outdoors, and hopefully people can be safer when they're out there.
Well, you said Spot. So Spot Gen 3 was my first satellite communicator. So was it the Spot X or Spot Gen 3? What Spot did you pick up first?
I had the original Spot, the Spot Gen 1. It was like a puck. I think it might have had one LED on it. I don't really remember. I switched over when DeLorme came out with their unit because it had a map on it. And DeLorme at the time, I think they were like a mapping company. They still are a mapping company. I think they just sold off the InReach part to Garmin. But I liked that there were maps on board. I don't know if there were maps on board. It was an interface though. It was like a two-way communicator as opposed to the one-way. But it was a Spot Gen 1. I remembered it wasn't always super reliable, but at the time, it was an incredible tool. Now I think we take it for granted that we can take a little piece of plastic like this and metal and communicate with satellites above the Earth. But at the time, it was just mind-blowing that you could do that. It still blows my mind that you can do that with like a little thing like this, or from my iPhone even, that I can communicate with a satellite. But that was the first one, the Spot Gen 1. But I recently got this guy, a Spot X, and I'm going to retest it because Apple has invested a ton of money into Globalstar, which is the network that Spot runs on, because that's the backbone of the iPhone satellites communications. And I can only imagine that if they're going to start doing that, they're going to continue to do that. And they see satellite communications as really the future of communications, whether it's backcountry, outdoors people, or somebody just with a cell phone who's driving, across the West and loses satellite reception and still wants to be able to message or eventually have a high-speed data. So the fact that Spot or Apple's investing in Spot, I figured let me pick up this guy, which I always wanted to try. I love that it has the keyboard like the old BlackBerry, where you can type messages, because that's sort of the biggest Achilles heel of other units. I got this, and I'm starting to test it out. But yeah, Spot was the first one, and I have not been back on a Spot in many years, maybe 8 or 9 years. So it'll be interesting to see what it's like.
Yeah, so I started with the Spot Gen 3 just because it was probably the most or the least expensive device out there. And I just moved to Colorado from Oklahoma. And, I had a house there we were trying to sell, I had an apartment here, and, finances were a little tough or a little tight. So I just started out with the Spot Gen 3 and then went on to the Spot X after that. But you're making me think of your latest video. And I really wanted to ask you about this because you went down to, I think, South Carolina, and you went to the emergency center, and I believe it's for Spot and the Motorola Defy. And correct me if you want on that, but that was an incredible video that really, you edited it really well. And it was really great information. I would think that gives a lot of people a lot more confidence of how things are run. And I guess I really want to end up with, two questions is, how did that get all set up? What brought you to even think about that? And then did it give you a lot more confidence if you ever need to use the emergency or the SOS button?
Yeah, thanks for watching the video. And yeah, that was an incredible experience. I was in South Carolina because I wanted to do a test of the Defy and some other units in a pretty dense tree canopy in some old growth forest in Congaree National Park. And I stopped there on the way to the command center or the crisis response center, which was in Florida, southern Florida, because I live on the West Coast. So if I'm going to fly east, I gotta at least get a hike at somewhere there. Florida is not a great hiking spot down there. Well, there's Everglades National Park, but I did the review on the Motorola Defy a month or two ago, and I didn't really know anything about the company that runs essentially the emergency response, which is called Focus Point. And they commented on one of my videos, and we struck up a conversation. And just in that conversation, I was like, a lot of people don't really know what happens when you hit the SOS button. They know that somebody's going to respond to it. They know they're going to, contact some kind of emergency services, but I'm sure there's a lot more that goes into it. And, it would be a great opportunity to give people a glimpse into what that is, to make people feel confident that, it's legit, because these days, we all call somebody a call center at some point, and, it's somebody in a different country, or it's somebody working out of their basement in like a remote situation. And I think you really don't know who's answering the call. And when your life is depending on it, it's important, but they were kind enough to let me come by and interview people and really get an idea for how it all works. And it was incredible. Everyone there was, it's sort of, Rick, the first time that we talked, even though I didn't really know you, we could just slip into conversation immediately because we both sort of live in the same world and we enjoy the outdoors and gadgets and everything. And everyone there was the same. Everyone had some kind of outdoors experience, some kind of emergency response experience. It really, what I was surprised about was it really amazed me that everyone already had experience dealing with emergencies. It wasn't like they were hiring somebody and then training them and to do it. These were people who had worked as paramedics, as EMT, as Secret Service, military, whatever it might be. So they knew what it was all about, and they were kind of taking that experience into this world of technology and the outdoors to help people. So that was really cool, and I'm really thankful to Focus Point for doing that. And I was also surprised at I was a little hesitant to do it because I didn't want it to feel like a commercial, because it wasn't a commercial. But it's a private company and it's a device, but they have this insurance policy called Overwatch and Rescue. It's like the optional one. And if you have a Garmin InReach, you probably know there's like the optional, whatever it is now, SAR 50 or SAR 100. But that really surprised me too, because it wasn't what the Focus Point offered wasn't an insurance policy. It was like AAA essentially for the outdoors. And all you had to do was just send your bill, and it wasn't like a claim. It wasn't all of that. It just covered everything. And that was the overwhelming, sentiment and vibe that I got there, was that they're there to help you. You pay them a couple bucks every year, and they're going to do whatever it takes to help you get out of whatever the jam is. And it was, what also surprised me, and I think I conveyed it maybe a little bit in the video, was that when you hit SOS, and I've done videos about this, you don't always know who's going to come, especially when you're overseas. And there was this lady from Argentina, and the weather was bad. She was like in a really remote spot up in the mountains in the Andes, I think. And when they called for help, it wasn't, people were like, well, we're going to wait till the weather gets better, or, they were out on other calls, and they had called all of these different people to come rescue her. Nobody could get out. They weren't just passing the message on, they were advocating for her rescue. They eventually contacted like a private group of mountain rescue people who went out and got her. And I think she, like, from frostbite, she might have like lost a toe, or, something pretty serious, but it was obvious that if she was there for another few days, she might not have made it. So it was really cool to know that people are there, making sure that you're taken care of, not just passing the message on to whoever, because who knows, especially if you're in a foreign country or whatever. Again, this is not a commercial, but for me, like $35 a year for that's a no-brainer. So,
is it only for Spot and the Motorola Defy, or can you get that for any device?
Yeah, it's a good question. You can get it. You can just buy it. You can just go there and buy it. It's the same price, and you can contact them with like a cell phone, right? So if you were overseas and you just needed help, because one of the things that covers like civil and arrest, right? You're in who knows where, some country, and there's rioting, and you just need to get out. The planes have stopped flying. They would help you with that. But for the Spot and the Defy, they're actually like directly plugged into that SOS. So if you bought the service with, say, a Garmin, I don't know how you would be able to contact them, but maybe you could just contact them via a normal message using the Spot. It's a good question. I'll have them chime into the comments on your on the video here and see if maybe they can shed some light on it from Focus Point. But just so you know, Garmin offers the insurance policy as well. Zoleo has an insurance policy. So they all have this, and in fairness to them, I haven't been invited to go and look at their response centers or anything. I certainly would if I did that, but they have that too. I just don't know how it is compared to the Focus Point one, and maybe that's another video where we can do a compare and contrast between those responses. But yeah, right now I have not been invited to any of those other places.
All right, so we were sitting here and just talking a little bit while some planes flew over, and I won't tell you what we were talking about, but it made me laugh, so it's good. Sometimes I can be a little dry on camera. Actually, my kids told me just last night, one of my kids said, you need to relax and quit, act like you're having a conversation and not be so uptight. And it's like, well, I'm an engineer. How can I not be uptight? So working on that. But, you were talking about the Search and Rescue Center, and I really wanted to get this one question about, have you used your satellite communicators in the past for yourself or anybody else? And I know you said, been doing this for like 10 years. Have you had any experiences that you can share without giving away, private details on anything that might offend somebody that you've told the story? But is there anything that you can share that you've experienced with these, and why it's important to have it?
Yeah, sure. I have used it. I've never used it for myself, which is, when I first got a satellite communicator, I thought it was going to be for me. And one of the benefits was knowing that I could help other people sort of, after the fact. I've done an inReach 3 times, and I've done a PLB once. Not in recent years, but I had twice on Mount Whitney. There were people who had severe altitude sickness, and I did the inReach SOS. I reported it, and they sent a ranger up, and other people had come down and waited with the person. I ended up not waiting because other people were there, but people were just so sick that they couldn't move. And if you're immobile on the mountain in an exposed area, somebody's got to do something about it. And I had a similar thing once here in Southern California, where someone had fallen off the trail and they were sort of stuck on the edge of a cliff. And I called in for them, and a helicopter came. So the other time was I activated a PLB, and I was at White Mountain Peak, which is by Mount Whitney. It's not part of the Sierras, but it's still very high altitude, 14,000 plus foot peak. I saw these two guys that were they looked like students. They had, jeans on and sneakers, and they were in a pretty rugged spot. But on my way back, one of the guys, altitude sickness, vomiting, really bad shape, and then ended up pressing the button on the PLB. Within about an hour, there was a helicopter there, some branch of the military. I don't remember which one exactly, but they took him out of there with his friend. They offered me a ride, but I had my car at the trailhead, so I did not partake in that. I would have liked to, but yeah, that was the other time. So the nice thing about having these is, like I tell people this all the time, is they might save your life, but you might be able to save other people's lives, and it'll cost you whatever the subscription cost is. And for me, that was totally worth it.
Yeah, I mean, we know nothing will ever happen to us, but when you can put it in terms of, like you've just shown, it's going to happen to somebody else. And if you can be there to help them, that's great. But I really wanted to ask you another question here, because my daughter was on the Western Mountain Rescue Team in Gunnison, Colorado. And it's actually the only rescue team that's with a college in the U.S., I believe. But they handle the whole Gunnison area up to Crested Butte. And even though Crested Butte has their own search and rescue team. But we talked a lot about altitude sickness. And I've been in a situation before where I've felt like I was getting some altitude sickness. So we've had discussions about altitude sickness and how serious it is. And I always am kind of flippant about it, because I was up around 12,000 feet one time, and I was near Mount Evans, and I was all by myself, and some thunderstorms started kicking up, and I didn't have a satellite communicator at that point. That was when I first got here to Colorado. And I started getting lightheaded, and I was, could only go 20 feet or so, and I was wanting to get off that mountain. There was no tree cover. There were of course rocks, because it's the Rocky Mountains, but I felt the onset of it. But my daughter was talking about how serious it is, and there's some things you can do, like you should drink a lot of water ahead of time. That definitely helps. But can you talk a little bit about what your experience is with altitude sickness and why it's so serious and can actually lead to death, right? I mean, can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, and let me just preface this with, I'm not like a doctor or an expert. I just know from having it and seeing other people with it. But generally, the mild symptoms are like a headache. Your fingers will swell up a bit. Fatigue. When I get it, when I'm up like in the Sierras or something, up above, usually I don't get it until like after 12,000, around that ballpark. But if I stop and I rest and I just let myself acclimatize for like 15 minutes, I'll drink, I'll eat a little bit something. That's generally for me, that's a good way to kind of keep going and then assess, am I feeling better or am I feeling worse? And if I feel worse, then I'll just turn around, even though I might have planned and got a permit to do some kind of special hike. It's not worth getting sick for. And I've seen people pushing through altitude sickness before, but from what I understand, your brain can swell, you can die. If you've had it, if anyone else has had it, you just feel really bad. It's almost sort of it's like the worst hangover kind of in the world feeling. And if you're hiking, it's just not fun. It's not safe. And but it's tough. I see people with it in places like Mount Whitney, and it's tough to tell them, like, dude, you should be turning around and going back down until you feel better, because it's not worth, your life. And the other thing to think about is, if you're going up somewhere like somewhere high, Mount Evans, Mount Whitney, whatever it might be, if you're up there and all of a sudden you're moving at, maybe you'd normally hike up there at 1.5 miles, and now you're moving because you have altitude sickness at like a half a mile, a third of a mile an hour, you're not coming back till after dark. And then there's all kinds of other problems that could happen, because It's now dark out. You're not making good choices because your physical condition is deteriorated to such a degree where you're not on the ball. And then you introduced a whole other host of problems that can happen. And even if you are up there and you can hit the button, a helicopter might not be able to get up to where you are, whether it's the weather, whether it's the altitude, different things. So, you always want to be conservative when you're in the outdoors. Even though you have the button, you can hit SOS. Just remember that if you do have to hit SOS, other people like your daughter and other volunteers are now going to be going out and trying to rescue you. And yes, they're volunteers, but they're still at risk, even though they're accepting that challenge and they're accepting that risk in order to help other people. It could be just as simple as bagging your hike and just enjoying it for what it is. Even if you don't get to the top of a mountain, you can still experience it. And now it's a fun experience and not an experience where there's a search and rescue happening.
Yeah, a lot of things that they got called out on were people getting lost. And actually they were mostly in hunting season. And there were other things too, like ATV accidents, but lost personnel was one of the main reasons they got called out. And I recently did a video on that about all the different reasons. And I was talking with her, and we went down a list of like 6 things. I don't want to go over that here, but for anybody who wants to know about that, I'll have some information in the description below. And I want to take the opportunity right now to let you know that everything, like from Chris's website and YouTube channel, that information will also be in the description below. What I really wanted to find out now is, there's reasons to have satellite communicators depending on what kind of sport you're in or activity you're in, outdoor activity. And so let's start with hiking or backpacking real quick. And just kind of group some of these. What do you think are the best devices, satellite communicators? And some people call them satellite messengers or satellite communicators. They're one and the same to me. But what are the devices you would group and say these are the best for hiking?
Yeah, I think the Garmin inReach Mini 2 is the best. It's the one that I use the most. It's super small. It's just a little thing. I think it weighs 100 grams, maybe. Don't quote me on that, but that's the ballpark. I like it because it has all of the functions for the inReach in there. It's a little bit tough to type on this, but you can send your presets. You can do a weather report. You can do your tracking. All really easy. It's got these big kind of chunky tactile buttons. It's easy to clip just onto your backpack. And the battery lasts super long. It's got multi-GNSS, so it can get a fix pretty quickly. And it just works really well for hiking. Even going for backpacking for a couple days, I don't need to recharge this battery. It's fine. And it also has backup navigation in here. So if I'm going out, it all depends on what I'm doing. If I'm going on a hike where I know the terrain, I generally don't do this. But if I'm going somewhere new, I will load the course onto here as well as my other navigation options. And then if my other navigation options, like my phone, dies, I can always just fire this up and navigate that course on here in a way where the battery has a lot of juice. It's durable. I can drop this. I can use it in wet weather. So I think this is just sort of a really good all-arounder. If you're going out for longer, the Garmin Messenger, the Messenger device, it's confusing with Garmin because that's Garmin. But there's a Messenger app and there's a Messenger device, and this is it right here. I've had this for about a year. I haven't tested it. I'm going to come out with a review for this shortly, but this has a better battery life on it, but it lacks the navigation features. So if you don't really care about the navigation features, that might be a better choice for you. But those, I think, have been the best ones for backpacking. The Zoleo is good too. The Zoleo has been around for a while. That has the advantage that you get a dedicated email and a dedicated phone number. So, it's really just kind of doing the research and figuring out the nuances of what's important. Is the navigation important? Is the tracking important? Is the battery life important? And then just picking the best one out of those. But for me, the Garmin inReach Mini 2 has been my go-to device. Oh,
that's good to know. That's one of my favorites also. I have the 67i right here. I also use it quite a bit, but there are a lot of great devices. So what if somebody, doesn't need navigation? Maybe they like to carry hard, paper maps, or maybe they have a different way to navigate. And of course, there's all kinds of apps like All Trails, Gaia. You can mention several of them. And I have people giving me grief all the time about this. And they're like, you don't need maps, you don't need navigation on these devices. And, sure, okay. But I try not to argue, because it's more of learning and having a conversation with people, because there's so much I still need to learn. But if you don't need navigation, is there a different satellite communicator you would use or suggest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would say you always need navigation. I mean, you're an engineer. You know, like I do, that redundancy and backup is super important. When I hike, even when I'm hiking places that I know, I have my phone, and on the phone I'll have multiple apps. I'll have a satellite communicator that has navigation built in. I do use the 67 is a great device too. I didn't mention that, but when it's sloppy out or wet, I'll use my 67. But yeah, so I have my watch. I have maps on my Epics. I think having navigation, and I have paper. So you can't have enough, and you don't know what's going to happen. Like, I've been out and there have been wildfires. I've been walking, and I walk over a ridge and there's a huge mushroom cloud of smoke. And it's like, oh, okay, now I got to change my plan. So for the benefit that you get and the lightweight of a map and a device and a phone, really not a big deal. But if you just want something for messaging, like let's just say you want something for your car, just to drive or whatever, I think the Motorola Defy Satellite Link, that new one, is a great buy. It's super small. I've been carrying mine. I've been testing it, so I carry it with me out in the backcountry. But I also just leave it in my dash, in my glove box, because if you're out and you just want a message, maybe you're running late and you're out of cell phone range, or you have an emergency. It's got a long battery life, especially if you leave it off and you want to keep it in your glove box. And it's just a great device for messaging. It also uses a whole different satellite system. It uses geostationary satellites. And for whatever reason, the latency between the communications is much less than the Garmin inReach. So for a Garmin inReach in a good scenario with the Iridium-based ones, you're looking at like a couple minutes back and forth. I've noticed it has gotten a little bit better over the last couple of years, and I think it might just be totally anecdotal, but the latency on the Motorola Defy, I mean, it's like texting people on a cellular connection. It can be, not all the time, but it can be super quick. So I think if you don't need navigation, you just want something maybe to take with you when you're traveling or when you're driving, that Motorola Defy is a great deal. And the plans are very affordable. And I don't know when it goes to, maybe October 1st, but they have a special now where if you get it, you get a year's free service. So you can't beat that.
Yeah, so you just have done, I think, 2 or 3 videos on it, and I don't have the Motorola yet. I think it's coming in this week, or maybe it might be next week, but I'll be testing it. But you already have that, so I'm going to put a link up right here on the screen and in the description below to Chris's review of it. So if you want more information, check that out. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a question here, so we'll just go with it because we may not have an answer. But one of my questions here is, the Motorola Defy just came out. Do you know other devices, upgrades, units that are coming out from any of these or maybe there's a new product coming out from a different provider? Are you aware of anything new that's coming out? And if you don't have the answer for that, I mean, what's the best way for people to stay up to speed up on what's the new stuff that's coming out that's about ready to hit the market?
Yeah, good. I definitely have some answer there. I think to answer the second part first, subscribing to channels like yours and mine, we're always talking about these things, and I think with people like us, you're getting hopefully an unbiased opinion, right? It's just we're just guys like you who's watching this, and we're using them. We're not being paid. We're not, these aren't sponsored. These aren't fluff pieces. We're just going to tell you how it works. So I think that's probably a good way to do it. Otherwise, you could tune into the tech sphere. Sometimes they talk about these on blogs like Mashable and Tech Radar and things like that. But there are some things coming out. Motorola, who does the Defy Satellite Link, this is just like a dongle, you pair with your phone, but they're coming out with a version of this that will be in a phone, in a Motorola Defy phone. And that I think it might be out in Europe now. I'm not 100% positive, but that will be coming to the States. And that's going to be an Android-based phone that has it all built in, which I love the idea of that. And then I think there's going to be a similar phone, but it's going to be one of those Caterpillar branded phones where it's going to be a rugged phone for the outdoors. Not 100% positive on that, but I think I did see that somewhere. The thing that I'm most excited about, or the thing I think is going to blow kind of the roof off of all of this, is when all of the cell phones get satellite reception. So it might have been about a year ago, but T-Mobile and Starlink announced a partnership where they're going to, in simple terms, they're going to put 5G towers onto Starlink satellites. And if you have a regular 5G phone, it will be able to do a text, basically connection with those satellites in the air, just like you would be able to do a connection with a cellular tower on the ground. It won't be a full data, high-speed data like it is on the ground, but at some point it will be. But when that happens, you're going to have all kinds of people hitting or dialing 911 or 222 or whatever it is in your country from the backcountry. And then what's going to happen is all of the 911 call centers, the PSAPs, are all going to have to figure out, like, well, what do we do if somebody calls us from the middle of the Bob Marshall Wilderness in Montana or the middle of, Alaska? What's going to happen then? And that's going to probably cause some growing pains in the whole system. But eventually, we'll see more of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point there wouldn't be like a Starlink phone. And it's been rumored there's been like the Tesla phone and all this, those are just, I think, people messing around on the internet, but that will happen at some point. And Starlink is a high-speed data connection. At some point, the antenna technology will be good enough so that you can get a high-speed connection on your phone, and that will happen. So I'd say if you're on the fence about getting a satellite communicator, maybe you just can't afford it, or you're not really going out in the outdoors that much, a couple of years, I think your phone will be able to do it. And if you have an iPhone 14 now or iPhone 15, which will come out tomorrow, be out by the time you see this video, maybe, those have satellite communications in them already. So if you're an iPhone user, get the newest one and you can do a satellite SOS. I actually took that into these pretty extreme box canyons in Nevada. Don't say Nevada, you say Nevada, otherwise people get upset with you. But it worked great. Having a directional antenna, and you're an engineer, so you know, but the power of a directional antenna versus just an omnidirectional antenna is incredible. And just by pointing the phone, even when you don't point the iPhone, it will still get a satellite eventually. But if you just want to have that peace of mind, just get the new iPhone if you have an iPhone user. And again, Androids, that will all be coming. I think they said it was going to be 2 years. So I think maybe 25, we should get that 5G. I wouldn't hold my breath. It'll probably be later than that. And AT&T announced the same thing. And so did Verizon with other satellite providers. So that's all on the horizon. And the one thing that people haven't talked about a lot, and kind of alluded to it a little bit with the Starlink, is getting high-speed data connections from a satellite communicator. All these Iridium-based ones now use, I think it's called the short burst data service from Iridium. And it's not meant for high-speed internet. It's not meant to post pictures to Instagram. People always ask me, I will invariably get comments in all my reviews where it's like, can I use this to hook my phone up to the internet and post Instagram or do something else? And the answer is no, because they all use this Iridium service, which is just essentially small packets of data, like a text message. When Iridium updates its network and offers high-speed data available to something with an antenna, like the factor of this, then it'll be a whole other suite of products and services that come out. There will be like Doppler radar. There will be all kinds of things that you can't do now with this smaller bandwidth service. So all of those things are on the horizon. I'd say if you're going to get to the very first question, if you're going in the outdoors, getting a satellite communicator like this is super affordable. I'm not sure exactly how much it is. Rick, you can put a link underneath your video for the device, but this is really affordable. And if you're going out of cell phone range, this can save your life, right? So what is that worth? What can you cut out? Like, how many lattes from Starbucks can you cut out of your diet in order to pay for one of these, so that if you are in danger, somebody can come and save you. I think it's worth it. I think if you look at cases like Julian Sands, right? I don't know if you heard him. He was that actor from LA. He went missing in Mount Baldy. They found him recently. They didn't find any kind of satellite communicator. They weren't sure if he basically slid down a pretty intense slope and he was in a gully, and they couldn't find him. But, if he was in that gully and he had a satellite communicator, he could have been saved. Or if he died on the way down, his family could have found him without, I think it was 500 hours of search and rescue time there. So, what is it worth? Don't wait until you're laying in a gully with your legs broken because some freak accident happened that you had no control over. It wasn't about your hiking ability or your outdoors skills. It was just an accident, a heart attack, a stroke, whatever it might be. You don't know. So just investing in one of these, I think, is sort of a no-brainer.
Well, that leads me to another question here, and I've been wondering about this with the iPhone 14 because I did some tests on it myself. And personally, I don't like where the iPhone 14 is right now, and I do have the iPhone 14. But when you have to hold, well, like you're saying, you don't have to necessarily point directly at the satellite, but your service is going to be improved, and so, what if you've broken your arm or both arms or worse, and you can't hardly move? Maybe you can move enough to press the SOS button on a device, but you can't turn around and point at a satellite. That's been a kind of not a fear because I don't use my iPhone 14 for that. But I was looking at that. So when I heard about T-Mobile and Starlink and them teaming up, all of a sudden I'm starting to think about, what is this going to do to, Garmin, to Zoleo, ACR, Bivy, all these different companies? Are they going to adjust? Is there still a place for those devices in the future? Because, I'm going to throw one answer out for you and let you take it over here, but I think if you're climbing Mount Everest, now I don't know if a device works at 6,000 feet, whatever it is, whether they're using those, and there's a lot of people up there and guides. But as an example, if you're an extreme mountain climber and you're out in severe weather, just really tough environmental conditions, well, I don't think you want a phone that has that ability. Now, if you're driving around, you're doing day hikes and it's beautiful weather, okay, a phone with that satellite ability, but again, it comes back to, I'm thinking like, what's it going to do to that market, to those companies? How does all that work? And it's exciting. I'm glad they're doing it, but these are just some questions I have. And so I guess, without going off to, if you don't want to go there, but like trying to figure out what might happen in the future. But, do you have a suggestion for people that, when is it good to use your phone? And if it had satellite abilities, or you want to go with a device that's rugged?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's going to be similar to what the smartphone did to outdoors navigation. In the old days, you had to have a Garmin like your GPS Map 67. That was the move. And now the majority of people I see out in the trail are using their phones. They're using All Trails or whatever it might be to navigate a hike. And it's like a 80-20 or 20-80 principle. I think it gets you a certain amount there and it works for a lot of people, but your phone is not a rugged outdoors device. And if you're somebody who's into the outdoors and you just want a device that's going to work all the time in the outdoors, you need to get something like a Garmin. Just like if you're going to navigate and it's rainy or snowy or you're somewhere that a phone is not going to work well, you want a GPS map unit. That's just how it is. And I think there will always be a place for Garmin as a provider of those types of units. I wish there was some competition in that space. There really isn't a lot. I don't know if all of the other players like the ACR Bivy, I don't know if they're all going to be around when phones have it, because there's going to be less of a demand. I think you're either probably going to get like a super rugged thing that you can smash and thrash and do whatever to it, or you're just going to know, hey, I have this in my phone. If I'm in trouble, I can use this to get out. I'm going to do a day hike, or I'm going to do a bucket list hike, and this is going to be okay for me. So I think there'll always be a space. I don't think any of this is going away. Now, what I would love to see, my fantasy device, if we want to geek out here, is I would wish somebody would build an Android device that's rugged, that has like the satellite communications built in when that happens, or even if they don't, something you can pair with one of these types of things. But an Android device that has buttons on it. Just like I know with Android, you can connect like a rocker, like the rocker panel on your 67 where you move the mouse around on the map, something like that on a phone. So you could use a touch screen, or you could use those buttons to control it. So that would be a killer device, because then you could have all the power that you get in a cell phone. And if you're not familiar with like how cell phone or smartphone navigation works versus a Garmin, because the cell phones have these processors that can do video games and all kinds of crazy computational stuff, they're much quicker. So zooming and panning on the map is much easier on a phone than it is on a Garmin. But it's not an outdoor instrument, so it can break, the battery can die. But when somebody builds an Android that has that little rocker on there, then we can do all kinds of cool stuff.
That's awesome. So somebody decides after listening to us that they want one of these satellite communicators. Do you just recommend they test it, make sure that you've got service, and then go out in your first outdoor adventure and practice on the adventure? Or should you spend some time testing it near your home on a trail close by? And then the follow-up question to that is, how much time does it really take to be proficient enough to when you go out, you know what you're doing? And there's two things. I'm throwing a lot of questions at you here, but if somebody is using their cell phone and the syncing of that with the Bluetooth because they like the convenience, and I do, I'll do that when I'm out here on day hikes, I'll use my cell phone. But then all of a sudden you lose Bluetooth connection. You have some technical difficulties, and then you're relying on your device again. I mean, how much time do you think it takes to really be proficient and know what you're doing and be able to handle that device up to and including SOS?
Yeah, good question. You never want to just get something and then take it out on a hike, whether it's a satellite communicator, whether it's any piece of gear, right? Like a backpack. You always want to just go for a walk around your house or something with it on, just to make sure it all fits good, it works good. What I do when I get a new device is I make myself a cup of coffee in the morning, I take it out, and I read the manual. Now, I know that's not a popular thing, and I'm not a manual guy. I'm a guy who just turns it on and starts using it. But I found that by just going through the PDF on my computer, having the device, just walking through, I might not become proficient at everything, but at least I get an idea of everything that it can do. And I'm aware that, okay, this has trackback. Like I use trackback on this 0 times, but I know it's in there. I know it's an option, and I feel confident that I could figure it out if I'm using it. And then for the main functions, just go for a walk around your house, test it out, see how it works. It doesn't have to be a big session. I know with the Garmin stuff, you could say a lot about the interfaces with the Garmin stuff, but people have a hard time with it. It's not completely intuitive, but I guarantee you, if you just spend some time, just read through the manual, read a section about dropping a waypoint, and then just do it from inside your house with your cup of coffee, you'll kind of understand it. Once you get a hang of the Garmin stuff, it's very easy. It's just that initial kind of getting a hang of it. And once you learn one Garmin, you can kind of figure out all the Garmins too. So there is a happy ending to the learning a Garmin story, but that's what I would recommend. And in terms of like Bluetooth and everything, I don't like using my phone in the outdoors. I enjoy using the maps on there. I like being able to just pinch and zoom outside of a map, but I don't like having to deal with it. I don't like the screen. I'd much rather have a rugged device, but I do like the processing power of dealing with navigation on a phone. But what I would say before you go out, because this has gotten me enough times, before you go out, while you're still in cell phone service reception or data reception, make sure that your app is logged in. Because if you get out in the trail and your Garmin Explorer, your Garmin Messenger app is not logged into your accounts, you'll be SOL, as they say. So make sure that's all logged in, everything's connected, your Bluetooth connection is good. I don't like having a Bluetooth connection depending on that, which is why I like having something like the InReach Mini where I can just do it all with the buttons. And again, once you get a hang of it, it takes, a second or two to send a message with this. It's not really a big deal. But getting your phone out, troubleshooting a Bluetooth connection, I mean, that's not fun at home. Doing it in the rain when it's getting dark out and you're panicked is even less fun or effective, probably. So that's my advice.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I was out here with the 67i doing a video just before this. And I remember at home, I was having some issue with the Explorer app recognizing the 67i. But I had forgotten about it, and I got out here on the trail, and I wanted to create, I like creating courses on the Explorer app better than even, using the explorer.garmin page on the web page that we have when you're a Garmin user, and better than using it to the device, because I can go in here real quick and put points down and create a course and navigate. But it's much easier to me when I have my phone and I can click on it and create a course, and it's super fast. But all of a sudden, it didn't recognize it. So I'm going, okay, great. It's not working. I'm out here to do a video, and Cris is waiting for me here just shortly, and I got to get moving. And so, but because I've tested it enough, I was able to go into my device, create a couple waypoints, create the course on the device itself, and do some tracking. I didn't really like how that was working, because I'm going to have to reset this device back to the factory settings. I'll get into that one second. But the map showed up. I got detail when I was farther out, but when I zoomed in, I couldn't see the trail. So there's an issue there. But when I just hit start recording, or the recording controls, I hit start, it was tracking my location. And then at the bottom, it said track back. So I could track where I was going. I could get back to safety easily. I just want to bring up here as a side note for people is, I mean, I test these a lot. I don't know maybe if you've had this experience, but I have sometimes out here, it gets brain dead. I mean, it's like sometimes you're using your computer so much, you've got to power off, or you've got to, with the TVs, this happens a lot of time. It gets, there's something that happens with the TV, and you've got to like hold the power button down for 10 seconds, and to me, it just gets stupid. And so right now I've got something going on with my GPS Map 67i, and I want to call Garmin and talk to him about it. And I've got Garmin on my speed dial, but you may have to do this with your device sometimes. You may have to reset it and to clear it and to make something work. Because I've had some situations where I've called Garmin and they're like, "Oh, we don't know." I'm like, okay, so I reset it back to the factory settings and it fixed it. So, I mean, have you ever had an experience with that where you've had to do that?
Probably in an ideal world, I would just reboot everything before I used it. So before I went out on a hiking trip, it's probably a smart move to reboot. I don't actually do that, but that happens to me not only with Garmin's, with pretty much everything. Just doing a reset is always a good deal. Not a full factory reset. The factory reset is what I do when I can't figure it out. And I've had experiences similar to yours where Garmin support, they can't help me. They don't know what it is. I've also heard a funny story that Garmin support used to refer people to my video on how to use the Garmin InReach Mini. A few readers have told me they called Garmin. They said, "I'll go watch the hiking guy video." So flattered, but not comforted. Yeah, just turn it off and just know that Garmin's really good about updating their firmware. I will give them that. There's always firmware updates, even on devices that are older. So if you have bugs, your best move is to go to the Garmin support forums, and you can look in there, see if other people are experiencing it. If not, you can post your information there, and Garmin, the development teams, use that to update their devices and do it. And I've had that happen with devices before, where I've posted something and other people have chimed in that they were experiencing the same thing, and Garmin eventually addressed it. So not great if you need it to work like now because you're going on a trip tomorrow, but it is good to know that they are constantly evolving and doing that. And Rick, like you said, like the best bet is just to go back to the factory settings and just start from the beginning, especially like if you are going on a trip tomorrow. That's probably what I would do.
I think I might have run out of questions for you, but I wanted to give you this opportunity real quick. If you got anything you want to bring up, anything I haven't covered that you think is important, or maybe a question for me, but is there something that you want to cover before we get ready to sign off?
So Rick, I've told you about all of the devices that I use and recommend. I know I see your videos, I watch your videos. I know you're like deep into all of these outdoor devices. What would be your favorite picks? Like, what do you think the top devices are these days?
Well, I've got a top 11 satellite communicators of 2023. I put a link right here on the top right of your screen in the description below. I also covered it back in 2022. Now, my top 11 does not cover the Motorola Defy because I don't have it yet, but I go through and I group them and I actually rank them according to my favorites. And again, I want to go back to what you said earlier is we're not getting paid. I haven't gotten a free or a discounted. I will say Garmin did give me 30% off of one device one time. But basically we're buying these and maybe they give them to us once in a while as a rental. And I haven't had that happen, but I think you have, Chris. But we're out here testing these, and I'll speak more for myself on this one here, but I'm out here just being practical. I'm not trying to be overcomplicated. I'm not trying to get into some real deep details on something. It's how if you start this thing up, you get your you got service and you've tested it a little bit, and you come out here and you just turn it on and you're tracking or track back or you're navigating or messaging. How does it work and what are the issues also? And so that's where I know Chris and I are both coming from. So this advice or my opinions is just that. And I want to start before I say anything else. There's not one right device for everybody. Now I may have my favorites, but if you as an example, if all you want to do is communicate, my personal favorites for communicating, and I haven't tested the Motorola Defy yet. It's the Zoleo and the Messenger because those go from Wi-Fi to cell service to satellite service without you doing anything. But if you're going to be in satellite service, you better have a clear view of the sky. But if I'm hiking, I'm going for the Mini 2, which I don't have on me today, or the 67i. If I go on a long hike, like I've been planning on doing the Colorado Trail, breaking it up, I'm not going to do it all in 1 year. But if I go on a long hike and I know my phone's going to die, I'm always going to carry a portable charger with me. But still, I'm going to put my phone on battery save or turn it off. And I'm going to stick with the 67i all-in-one device. If I want an all-in-one device, then I'm looking at primarily the 67i. Now, I want to bring up something real quick. If you're looking at a 66i or a 67i and the 66 is cheaper, forget it. The 66i's battery sucked. Now, maybe it was just my device, but that's what Garmin's their data showed on their specifications is you only get a day or a day and a half. And I was out on the Colorado Trail in the first segment, and that 66i was dying. And my son, we almost called SOS for my son. He was on the back side of the segment one. My daughter and I had to turn back. Like to say we made it and we can hike the whole Colorado Trail in one summer. But we were getting ready to call SOS. I had to go back around the other side. I charged my 66i up on the trip around the mountain. We had to go. I was wiped out. I did not want to go find him. But my only son, so what am I going to do? So I go up there, we get him off the mountain. My nephew is there. But that 66i, it's not worth it. Save up a little money and get the 67i. Now, if you're wanting to get in, you're in ATVs or four-wheel drives, I would say look at the Montana 700i, 750i. The 750i has the photo capability. Then there's the Tread series with Garmin, and that's really meant for ATVs and four-wheel drives, and you can communicate. But those are pricey, and I haven't even touched those yet as far as getting them. And someday I probably will, but not today. And then there's other things too, like so you want a minimalist device. Well, okay, the Garmin inReach Mini 2, the Mini is still a great device. The Mini 2 has better features than the Mini does. And then you could still look like the ACR Bivy Stick, the Zoleo, the Somewhere Global Hotspot. I'm not sure if Somewhere Global Hotspot's selling anymore. I haven't seen the ability to buy them, not on Somewhere Global Hotspot site. I think you can still get them on Amazon. But what I don't like about the ACR Bivy Stick, the Somewhere Global Hotspot, and the Zoleo is basically you've got an SOS button and a check-in. If you're going out and I'm going to use all this great stuff that's synced to my phone, and I got Bluetooth and I got the maps and all this, and I can message. Guess what? You can't message if you lose Bluetooth. They're great devices, and if you want something and you want to go with that, that's great. Have something on your pack. At least you can call SOS. You may not be able to communicate if you lose Bluetooth. But those are just some things to be aware of. But honestly, the top satellite communicators for me, after testing these for the last 4 years, it's the 67i and the Mini 2. And again, the 67i, if I'm going to be out for a longer period of time, rugged, and I know I'm going to lose battery on my cell phone.
Nice, yeah. And just to echo a couple points, Rick, when you look at battery life, what's important is, like, because I know people are looking at it and they say, oh, it lasts for 7 days. I'm never going to go out for 7 days. Don't think of it that way. Think of it, you're going out for 1 day and now you're sending 100 messages back and forth because somebody's having a heart attack, or you're trying to figure out what's wrong with your body, and you're having a two-way communications with the emergency response center. That's where that battery life comes in. And that's the key for it. And the other thing I would say too, with the Bluetooth devices, I can't stress enough, like they're great devices, but when your phone doesn't work or Bluetooth doesn't work, you take away all of that two-way communication. And when I went to that, when I went to Focus Point in that video that we talked about earlier, the one thing that everyone said, everyone I talked to who is working the emergency phones there, was that the two-way communications is the game changer. Being able to give information, get information, really changes the shape of an emergency. So it's not just people kind of, rescuers going out into a totally unknown situation, but it's rescuers who, like, maybe if you have some kind of medical condition, if you got bit by a rattlesnake, right, or some kind of poisonous snake, they can come out there with the antivenom. Like, that's the difference. So having a reliable way to communicate two ways is important. To just follow up with, like, what you said, the 67i, and I didn't really stress it in the beginning, is a great unit. I mean, it nailed it. I did a video, I think I was speculating that it's a Phoenix processor in there because it's just so good. The battery is so good. But that's a great choice if you want if you want navigation as well. It has all the maps preloaded versus a one-way connection. Maybe your Bluetooth dropped out, or you have an older device like those Spot, the Gen 3, where it's just one way. Definitely much, much better than nothing. But investing in the two-way connection means that you can tell them, like, hey, a snake bit me. I don't know what it is. This is what it looked like. You can do all that stuff, and they can resolve the problem, because the time is the critical asset that you just, you want the most of in order to ensure a safe outcome. So, yeah, but all good choices. Definitely would say have something, even if it's a matter of upgrading your phone, your iPhone to be the iPhone 14 or whatever it might be. Having something is better than having nothing. There's people by me who've crashed their cars in the national forest, and the automatic crash detection's gone off, and it's called SOS via satellite. When they were, in their car, they weren't even moving around. It just worked. So it's better than nothing. If you're out in the outdoors, if you're out of satellite range, it's your life. So you wouldn't, if somebody told you, how about there's no more 911 in your life? You would think they're crazy. So, get that in the backcountry. Definitely worth it.
So I was up at the Dillon Reservoir up at Keystone, and there was a search and rescue team, and they were putting their boat in the water, and they were going to recover a body. And they had 3 recoveries or rescue operations that week. And I walked up, and I think I had my Mini on me at that time. And one of the search and rescue guys, he was up on top of the boat, and he looked at it and he goes, "Thank goodness." He said, "You don't know how much it helps them to do their job better and to get to you quicker. It could be the difference between your life, you living, or maybe a more severe injury or less if they get there faster." And yeah, just, them knowing, maybe it's multiple people. We've had recently up here, we had 3 situations with falls in the Rocky Mountain National Park, and 2 had helicopter rescues from the National Guard, and one person didn't survive, the other one did. I don't know the current situation now, whether the person that survived on the airlift actually lived, but he was real critical. Somebody else had fallen into a snowbank farther down, basically head first. He may have not survived in the first place, whether he had a satellite communicator or not. But in that case, if he had the satellite communicator, all of a sudden somebody's, he has map share, and some family and friends have been keeping track of him a little bit and all of a sudden he's overdue, well, they can go click on that link and they can see, like, well, he's been in this one spot up at this 14,000 foot peak for 3 days. Well, at least they can recover your body. And, you know, it's best to always have a rescue operation where you live, but even if a person didn't live, you know, there's reasons to have that satellite communicator. So it's just really important from everything I've ever seen and heard. So, well, Cris, I wanted to give you an opportunity here real quick as we sign off. Is there something that you want to add to what we were just talking about? And then if you do, but give everybody your information about where they can find you. Do you have something more than just the website and YouTube channel, or do you have Facebook or Instagram? Kind of give people information of what they can find, how they can reach you or find you.
Yeah, YouTube is where I mainly live in terms of social life. I'm pretty good at answering comments there. I'm not on Facebook or Twitter anymore. It's just too much. I am on Instagram. You can find me there, but I don't really do social media much aside from YouTube. HikingGuy.com. I also have a video coming up that I'm going to be shooting next week in one of the densest national forests here in the lower 48. I looked at satellites, vegetation indices to figure out where the densest tree canopies are, and I'm going to be testing. I've got a bunch of them: Bivy Sticks, SpotX, Garmin's, you name it. I'm going to be doing a head-to-head test because the one thing I get asked all the time is, you know, does it work in a tree canopy? And I have tree canopy here, and it seems pretty dense, but let's take it to the densest place in the country that we can find and see what happens. So stay tuned for that. And I just want to thank you, Rick, for having me on and having this chat. We could have made this video probably 7 to 8 hours and gone through a couple 6-packs during this conversation. So I love talking tech, hiking tech, outdoors tech. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. It's been a lot of fun. I know we've been talking about getting together and do some other videos in the future. Really looking forward to that. So we'll keep in contact. And everybody who's watching, if you like this, go check out Chris's site, The Hiking Guy, or not The Hiking Guy, HikingGuy.com and Hiking Guy on YouTube. Check his stuff out because he's been around doing this longer than me. We have, you know, similar perspective, but slightly different takes. And just like you saw, we've already talked about where he was at the SOS, the emergency center. Some real great information. So check him out. And really appreciate you guys hanging with us today. And leave comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you have advice, tips, you know, if we've said something incorrect, I'm always open to get correction from people because, you know, we're not perfect. We do test these more than most people, but there's always something to learn or something we can do better. So please leave comments below and go check out Chris's sites. And we will see you back out here, me here in Colorado, Cris is out in California, and keep an eye out for those new videos coming up on both sites and for some more collaboration videos in the future. All right, thanks again, and we will see you in the next video.